I woke up 30 days before the apocalypse. No warning signs, no hero complex. First thing I did was buy 3 tons of cement. While neighbors laughed at me, I built walls. While coworkers hoarded canned food, I poured concrete for my iron gates. While the internet dismissed the end of the world as a rumor, I quietly installed solar panels on the roof. Suddenly, a suffocating putrid stench choked my lungs. My vision blurred, twisting into a mess of dried blood and gore. Beneath a shattered ceiling, terrifying roars mixed with the sickening crunch of bone. I was dying again. Mom, Dad, Shin, I am sorry. Then I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering like it would break my ribs. My throat wheezed like a broken bellows. Cold sweat soaked my shirt, sticking to my back. It was dark, but not that terrifying doomsday darkness. This was quiet safe, with the comforting silhouettes of my own furniture. Outside, the familiar streetlights filtered in, casting soft shadows on my desk, wardrobe, and computer. No stench of rot, just the scent of clean laundry and the faint aroma of the soup Mom made last night. Shaking, I reached toward the nightstand. Click, the lamp turned on. The soft light chased away the dark and stung my bloodshot eyes. My hands were intact skin, healthy with no bite marks or dried blood. I snatched my phone and the screen flashed to life. The date and time stared back at me. 30 days until the apocalypse. It was not a dream. The 3 years of starvation, betrayal, and agonizing loss were all real. I was reborn. I was actually back. 1 month before the world ended, dizziness washed over me, almost pulling me to the floor. I gripped my phone so hard my nails dug into my palms. The sharp pain proved this was real. Not hell, but a second chance. A chance to redo it all. Mom, Dad, Shin, I whispered, my voice completely raw. Nightmarish memories flooded my mind. My father swinging an iron pipe, rushing into the dark to draw the zombie horde away from us. That final desperate sight remains my eternal nightmare. In the shelter, my starving skeletal mother forced her last scrap of food into my hand, smiling and claiming she was not hungry, and my sister Shin freezing to death in my arms, her vacant eyes filled only with starvation. I gagged my stomach, turning violently. Rushing to the bathroom, I dry heaved over the toilet, but nothing came up. Only tears and sweat ran down my face. In the mirror, I saw my own reflection. Young, yet hollowed out by trauma and grief. At 28, I should have been in my prime, but my eyes carried the crushing weight of a 30-year-old survivor. No, I cannot let despair consume me. I splashed freezing water on my face. The shock cleared my chaotic mind. 30 days. I had 30 full days. Last time I ran like a headless chicken when the world ended, losing everything. But this time I had a weapon. I had the future. I knew exactly when the outbreak would hit, what the chaos would look like, and how to keep my family safe. We would survive, at all costs. Looking at my reflection, the fear and weakness in my eyes began to fade, replaced by a cold, relentless resolve. The weak, indecisive me from my past life was dead. In this life, I had to be the shield for my family, their ultimate protector. Even if I had to, my hands became stained with blood, and even if I had to fight the entire world. Back in my room, I grabbed a pen. My hands shook, but my mind was perfectly clear. I began writing my ultimate survival checklist. Food, water, medicine, weapons, power sources, and tools. Page after page, I listed everything. This was not just a shopping list, it was our lifeline, but the most urgent obstacle stared back at me: money. The small balance in my bank accounts was nothing compared to what I needed. Regular bank loans took too long and time was running out. That was when a dangerous, desperate idea from the darkest corners of my past life crossed my mind. Loan sharks. I knew it was like drinking poison, a direct plunge into the abyss. But it was the fastest way to get quick cash. Any guilt or fear evaporated instantly, replaced by sheer resolve. Compared to my family's survival, moral consequences meant absolutely nothing. Outside, dawn broke and birds sang. The world seemed perfectly peaceful, but I knew a massive shadow was creeping closer. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my phone and began searching the dark corners of the internet for shady contacts who operated in the shadows. 30 days until the end. My war started right now. By the time the sun was fully up, Mom was in the kitchen frying eggs. The smell drifted in, making everything feel like a dream. But the sent text to the loan shark on my screen and the survival list on my desk proved otherwise. I washed my face, trying to look normal, but I could not hide my bloodshot eyes and tense expression. At breakfast, I kept my head down, quietly eating my porridge. Dad was watching the morning news, commenting on global politics. My sister Shin yawned, complaining about her heavy homework. Watching them, my heart felt incredibly heavy. I had to speak up. Time was running out. Mom, Dad, Shin, I said, putting my bowl down. My throat felt incredibly dry. Once we are done eating, we need to talk. It is incredibly important. Mom stopped and blinked, looking at me. What is it? Why so serious? Is something wrong at work? This is 10,000 times more important than work, I said, taking a deep breath. It is about our survival. The table went dead silent. Dad turned off the television. My sister stared at me. Are you okay, bro? What are you talking about? She reached out to feel my forehead, but I gently pushed her hand away. I do not have a fever. In 30 days, maybe even less, everything changes. A global catastrophe is coming. Not a flood or an earthquake, but something far worse. Society is going to completely collapse. Laws and morals will not exist anymore. Surviving will be the only thing that matters. I laid out my rehearsed explanation in the simplest terms. A highly contagious lethal virus was about to sweep the globe and trigger total chaos. I told them I received this classified warning from an anonymous, reliable source that I could not reveal under any circumstances. But the warning is real, I urged. Mom reacted exactly as I expected, looking at me with deep worry. Have you been working too hard lately, honey? Take a few days off. Let me take you to see a doctor. Dad sat there frowning, skeptical and rational. Nonsense. How can you believe groundless rumors? Anonymous channels are usually just internet scams. Do you even understand what a global disaster means? Shin laughed it off. Bro, have you been playing too many video games lately? Or watching weird movies? Panic flared in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I know it sounds crazy, but please just trust me. We have to prepare. Even if it turns out to be a false alarm, we only lose a bit of time and money. But if it is real, our decisions right now will decide if we live or die. I slid the survival list across the table. We can start stockpiling basic things like food, canned goods, and medicine. They will not go to waste. We can also reinforce our old house in the country. Mom winced at the potential cost. Reinforcing a house and buying all of this, how much will that even cost? We do not have spare cash for this. I will find a way to pay for it, I blurted out. The important part is starting now. Dad frowned deeply. Find a way. How I am warning you, do not do anything illegal. Ruining your career over some internet rumor would be the real disaster. Or getting into trouble. Our conversation hit a dead end. They simply could not believe the world was ending. Instead, they just kept arguing about whether I had lost my mind or fallen for a scam. I had never felt so utterly powerless. I knew the truth, yet I could not make them see it. The family meeting ended in disaster. Dad slammed his study door shut while Mom cleared the table with tearful eyes, whispering about my sanity. Shin just stood there looking completely lost, not knowing what to do. I sat alone at the table staring at the bright sunshine outside with a cold heart. My first attempt had failed, but I could not stop. If they would not listen, I would start prepping on my own. I needed to buy basic, inconspicuous supplies in small batches first. The moment I closed my bedroom door, my determination returned. If talking did not work, facts would have to do the convincing. I remembered that with 20 days left on the countdown, the news would start reporting sporadic cases of a strange new strain of rabies. That was the first public sign of the impending apocalypse. Until then, I had to race against the clock to build our stronghold even without their support. Even if I had to take on massive debt and heavy risks, I would fight this battle alone. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at home felt strained. My parents kept looking at me with worry and unspoken questions. Dinner grew incredibly silent. I knew they were waiting for me to snap out of it, but I could not. The countdown hung over me like a guillotine. Every passing day tightened the knot in my chest. I could not wait for the news reports. I had to act. The first priority was securing cash. I totaled my savings and credit card limits, but it only added up to about 100,000 yen. For a project of this scale, that was barely pocket change. So that dangerous plan returned. Loan sharks. I knew I was playing with fire. In my previous life, I saw countless people driven to ruin over unpaid debts. But right now, I had no choice. Time was far more precious than money and far more unforgiving. Using my fragmented memories and some shady forums, I tracked down a loan shark nicknamed Vulture. His voice over the phone was raspy and freezing cold like a hissing viper. We agreed to meet at a quiet rundown tea house. I spent hours mentally preparing. Stepping inside meant sinking into the mud. But then I pictured my parents starving to death and the hollow look in my sister's eyes. I grit my teeth and pushed the door open. Vulture lived up to his name. He had a horrific scar. Without wasting words, he asked how much I wanted to borrow and what collateral I had. 500,000 no collateral, I said, trying to sound calm. I can pay high interest. Baldy stared at me like I was a complete fool. Kid, you trying to play me with empty hands. You think I run a charity, I'm not wasting it. It's to save a life, I tried to explain, but I couldn't tell the truth. After endless bargaining and promising ridiculously high interest and putting down my ID card, along with a repayment agreement that basically sold my soul, Baldy reluctantly agreed to lend me $200,000 first. The interest starts in a week with severe consequences if I default. Holding that heavy bank card that practically smelled of blood, I stepped out of the tea house. The sunlight was blinding, yet I felt zero warmth. This cash was my hope, but also a noose around my neck. With the money in hand, I immediately started small-scale buying. I was terrified of drawing attention. Today I would order compressed biscuits online tomorrow, buy bottled water from a wholesale market. I didn't dare ship things to my house, so I used several different pickup lockers. At the same time, I headed to my hometown. My hometown is in the suburbs, a standalone 2-story house with a yard, making it the perfect spot for a shelter. Using the excuse of remodeling for occasional visits, I hired a construction crew. I first had them raise the perimeter walls and top them with broken glass and security spikes. Then I replaced all the windows with thick explosion-proof glass and added heavy-duty steel bars outside. My dad dropped by once, frowning deeply. Xiaoyue, this is not a remodel. You are building a fortress. Is this really necessary? He asked, pointing to the heavy iron door we were installing. Dad, crime is up lately. Making it secure won't hurt, I explained vaguely. You kid, my dad sighed and stopped questioning, but the worry in his eyes deepened. I knew they all suspected I had lost my mind. Mom even secretly called my sister, begging her to talk some sense into me. These days I was spinning like a top, constantly dodging potential debt collectors, secretly buying supplies, supervising construction, and acting completely normal around my family. I was physically and mentally exhausted, yet seeing supplies pile up and our house grow stronger gave me a slow sense of security. Fighting this alone was brutal, but I knew I had to hold on. Until the truth came out, I was this family's sole sentry. Days passed in an eerie, tense calm. After 10 days, my $200,000 loan had flowed out like water. The fortress at our old house was taking shape, and the small warehouses I rented were now packed with essential survival gear. But my heart was constantly in my throat. I worried about trouble with Baldy, but I was even more terrified by the lack of news. Had I got the date wrong? What if the disaster never happened? That thought sent a wave of absolute panic through me. If the crisis didn't happen, everything I had done, the loans, the strained family relationships would all be a massive joke and a terrible mistake. Just as I started to doubt myself, the turning point arrived. It was during an ordinary dinner. The evening news was on. We were eating in our usual tense silence with only the sound of clinking bowls. Suddenly the anchor spoke in a grave tone, interrupting with a breaking bulletin. Recent reports from Southeast Asia and our own border cities have seen several cases of unexplained mania. Patients exhibit extreme aggression, fear of light, and drooling, resembling a rabies outbreak, but the pathogen remains unidentified. The health department advises the public that there is no need for panic, but to avoid contact with wild animals. Clack! My chopsticks slipped from my hand and hit the table. It was starting. Even though the broadcast was vague, calling it rabies, like the timing and the symptoms matched my memories completely. I looked up at my family. My dad stopped eating, his eyes locked on the TV screen. My mom put down her bowl with an uneasy look on her face. Dear me, what kind of disease is that? It sounds absolutely terrifying. My sister, Shen Xin, looked at me curiously. Hey, isn't that like what you warned us about? Forcing down my rising panic? I tried to speak calmly. Mom, Dad, did you hear that I wasn't making things up? The news is finally breaking it. They're playing it down, but once this virus spreads, it will move incredibly fast. My dad turned and stared at me with a sharp gaze. So you mean this is the start of that disaster? I can't be 100% sure, but the chances are extremely high, I said, seriously. This disease matches the early symptoms I warned you about. Mom, Dad, we must move faster. Honestly, we might already be running out of time. This time their reaction was entirely different. Dad didn't snap back. He fell silent, tapping his fingers on the table. Mom looked back and forth between me and the TV, her eyes filling with belief and panic. My sister Shen Xin ran straight over and grabbed my arm. Brother, what do we do now? What else should we buy? The news broadcast acted like a needle popping their belief that I was just losing my mind. Even if they couldn't fully accept the end of the world, yet the threat of a deadly contagion was enough to make them take me seriously. Dad, I urged, we must speed up the house modifications, especially ventilation and water storage. Mom, you and Shen Xin need to start tomorrow. Go to different supermarkets and buy non-perishable foods like rice flour and canned goods. Don't buy too much at once to avoid suspicion, but go every single day. Okay, yes, I'll go tomorrow. Mom nodded quickly. Dad finally spoke up. His voice was steady. I'll handle the reinforcements. I'm coming with you tomorrow to check the water and power lines. We must be self-sufficient. Seeing them finally take action, the massive weight on my chest lifted. Though the path ahead was terrifying, I was no longer facing it alone. But I knew this was just the start. The news reports would get frequent, panic would spread, and the real test was still to come. Plus, my loan was a ticking time bomb that could go off at any moment. Still having my family stand on my side meant everything. That news broadcast was like a starting gun, and our family's stalled engine finally roared to life. Early the next morning, Dad put on his old work clothes and followed me to the old house without a word. He stopped questioning the barbed wire on the walls, and he didn't complain about replacing the windows with expensive explosion-proof glass reinforced with steel bars. Clutching a tape measure and blueprints, he went over every detail with the crew, even suggesting reinforcement points I had missed. Watching his strong focus back, another weight lifted from my shoulders. Mom and Shin sprang into action too. Mom used her years of homemaking skills, hunting for bargains across supermarkets and wholesale markets. She stopped worrying about the cost, focusing entirely on shelf life and survival value. Bags of rice and flour, cases of cooking oil, canned goods, and dried mushrooms trickled in as they brought them home in small batches. Then under the cover of night, I would load them into my car and move them into the old house's basement. Shin stopped treating this like a game. She took charge of inventory, creating a detailed spreadsheet to track everything by category and expiration dates. She even searched online to find essential items I had overlooked, like female hygiene products, soap, toothpaste, vitamins, and basic skincare. Even if the world ends, a girl should still try to stay clean, right? She said, blushing but determined. I patted her head, my heart aching but feeling incredibly proud. Our house was tense but organized, filled with a grim sort of determination. When neighbors saw us moving massive boxes and asked what was happening, Mom stuck to our cover story, telling them we were just remodeling the house and storing items to save trips. But the crisis was gathering speed. Reports of the unexplained mania were rising, spreading from border towns into major transit hubs. Even though officials insisted things were under control, blurry videos and wild rumors flooded social media. Panic began spreading like water, seeping into dark corners. At supermarkets, instant food and water vanished from shelves, but my biggest threat was Baldy. The first interest payment was due. He called me with a mocking tone, playing with me like a cat with a mouse. Hey kid, got my money. Easy money, right? Fighting the urge to slam the phone down, I forced myself to sound calm. I know, you'll get it on time. Hanging up, I stared at the rapidly shrinking balance in my banking app, frowning. Loan sharks are a bottomless pit. Stocking up and renovations had eaten most of my funds, and the remaining cash would not last. If the disaster didn't strike soon, the debt collectors would ruin me before the virus did. But I had no way back now. All my chips were on the impending future. I watched my busy family, Dad checking the new rainwater system, Mom carefully dusting the cans, and my sister reviewing the inventory. They looked exhausted, but their eyes held a fierce determination to survive. On the final countdown day, we moved into the secure fortress. All supplies were locked inside, and the heavy steel door was locked from the inside with heavy steel bolts. The perimeter sensors were active. Our little home was now an isolated island. That night, the silence was suffocating. Nobody spoke, and we all went to bed early. But I knew nobody was actually sleeping. I lay in bed listening for any unusual sound outside my heart hammering in the dark. I don't know how much time passed, but just before dawn, metal twisted and crashed in the distance, followed by more collisions and a faint, horrifying shriek. It was starting. I bolted out of bed, rushed to the window, and peeked through the security bars. The sky was gray, but I could see headlights flashing wildly in the distance and columns of fire rising. Almost at the same instant, the phone on my nightstand lost its signal entirely. In an instant, the screen went pitch black. It wasn't a dead battery. The grid was completely dead. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. Power was gone, comms were down. This was starting exactly like my past life. The nightmare was beginning in the most brutal way possible. Xiao Yue, Dad whispered from outside, his voice tight with tension. I'm awake, Dad. Stay inside, I called back quickly, pulling on the heavy-duty clothes I had prepared. I grabbed the solid steel rod leaning against the wall and crept to the door. Dad was already out there clutching a massive wrench. Mom and my sister poked their heads out, faces pale. Are they here? Mom whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, signaling them to stay quiet. We huddled in the second-floor room with the best view peering nervously through the thick curtains. As dawn broke, our hearts sank. The street outside was a complete disaster. Smashed cars sat smoking in the road. But worse people were wandering around. They moved with stiff, unnatural jerks covered in dark red stains. Low, mindless groans escaped their throats as they drifted aimlessly. They would snap at anything that moved, a stray cat or someone running in panic. Right before our eyes, a man in pajamas ran out of the neighbor's yard screaming. 3 or 4 of those monsters instantly tackled him to the ground. Sickening screams and tearing sounds filled the air, then died down, leaving only the awful sound of chewing. Shenshin gagged, slapping a hand over her mouth. Mom pulled her close, her own body shaking violently as tears streamed down her face. Dad's face turned pale, his knuckles white from gripping the wrench. This was the apocalypse. No movie, no video game, just a bloody, horrific reality right in front of us. It is all real, Mom whispered, her voice trembling with sheer terror. Xiao Yuo, if it weren't for you. Before she could finish, heavy, chaotic footsteps echoed from the yard. Something was slamming against our reinforced gate. Bang, bang. Our hearts leaped into our throats. I gripped my steel rod tightly. I gestured for Dad to guard the stairs and signaled Mom and Shenshin to retreat to the back room. The slamming kept going, mixed with guttural growls. Holding my breath, I peeked through the peephole. 3 infected. They seemed drawn by something in the yard, blindly throwing themselves at the gate. Thankfully, our heavy iron door and reinforced deadbolts held firm, only rattling with muffled thuds. After a few minutes, the 3 monsters seemed to lose interest. They drifted away, disappearing down the street. Once they were gone, I exhaled my back, drenched in cold sweat. Dad slumped against the wall, finally relaxing. We survived the first wave, but this was just the beginning. Our world was gone forever. Our battle for survival inside this small fortress had just begun. The first day passed in a blur of terror and tension. We did not dare make a sound, keeping our voices to a whisper. During the day, we took turns on the second floor, tracking the patterns of the infected. At night, sleep was impossible. The slightest rustle outside would shock us awake. Our stockpiled water was holding up, but we had to think long-term. That was when our rainwater collection system proved its worth. Dad meticulously checked the filters, making sure every drop was purified before going into the tanks. Food was not an issue yet, either, thanks to Mom's careful planning. She rationed our meals strictly to keep us strong while stretching our supplies. We even managed hot food. The propane tanks we hoarded hooked up to a portable stove beautifully. By day 2 of the blackout, our solar panels started providing power. The electricity was finally stable. While limited, it was enough to keep the lights on, charge small devices, and run the perimeter security system. It was a massive advantage over other survivors, but Shenshin was taking it hard. She just sat in the corner, clutching her knees and staring out at the dead world. That first morning's horror had traumatized her. Mom stayed by her side, whispering comfort. Then on the 3rd night, our first real test arrived. Our fresh meat and vegetables were gone, leaving only canned goods and freeze-dried supplies. For dinner, Mom heated some canned pork and dried vegetable soup. After days of the same bland food, Shenshin stared at her bowl, miserable. "Mom, are we going to eat like this forever?" she whimpered. Dad, already stressed over a glitch in the water filter, snapped. "Be grateful you have food. Do you have any idea how many people out there do not even have clean water?" "How can you be so picky?" Shenshin flinched, terrified by Dad's rare, harsh tone. Tears welled in her eyes as she put down her chopsticks and looked away. Mom quickly stepped in to smooth things over. "All right, that is enough. She is just adjusting. Give her a break, dear." Mom turned to her. "Eat up, sweetie. You need to keep your strength up." Watching them, I knew this was not about who was right. High-pressure isolation was wearing on everyone. Scarce resources, constant uncertainty, and the isolation of our new reality were slowly eating at our nerves. "Shenshin," I said gently. Dad did not mean to snap. He is just stressed out. Things might be tough right now, but at least our family is safe. "We are together," I pointed to her bowl. "This food might not taste great, but it keeps us alive. Right now, survival is everything." Shenshin looked up, her eyes moving from me to Dad. Dad's expression softened. Shenshin quietly picked up her chopsticks and began to eat. I knew sweet talk alone would not cut it. We needed to stay busy to distract our minds and keep this house functioning. The next day, I pitched an idea. We would set up a watch schedule, learn basic self-defense, and use buckets of stored soil to grow fast vegetables in the yard. Dad would handle tech and security. Mom would manage supplies, and I would oversee the planning and outdoor scouting. Shenshin was tasked with record keeping and helping Mom. Having a clear purpose brought back a sense of order. The tension eased, but we all knew bigger challenges both from outside and within lay ahead. On our 7th day in the fortress, Shen made a chilling discovery. "Dad, quick, come look," she whispered, waving us over frantically. Dad and I rushed to the window, peering out in the direction she was pointing. 3 men were creeping around the corner toward our house. They wore filthy jackets, carried steel pipes and machetes, and scanned the area with sharp, predatory eyes. They were definitely not infected. They were living, breathing survivors. "They are real people." Shen gasped, a spark of hope in her voice. It was our first time seeing other normal humans since the outbreak, but my heart sank, and Dad's expression instantly darkened with intense suspicion. "Keep quiet. Let us see what they want," I whispered, waving everyone back. The 3 men had spotted our heavily barricaded house. They stopped a short distance away, pointing at our reinforced walls and heavy gate, muttering, "These folks definitely have loot." A tall, lanky guy muttered, staring at us with naked greed. "That gate is solid, though. Breaking in will be tough," a stocky man added, tapping a pipe against his palm. Their leader was a heavily scarred brute. He studied our house, then stepped right up to the gate. "Hey," he bellowed, "is anyone in there? We are survivors from the neighborhood. No trouble. We just need a little food and water." His loud shouting echoed down the dead street, instantly drawing the attention of 2 distant infected. They began shambling toward us. Mom and Shen stared at me in terror. Dad gripped his wrench, shaking his head. I knew we could not open the door. In times like this, desperate humans are far more dangerous than monsters. Getting no response, the scarred brute yelled again, his voice turning hostile. "Hey, do not play games. I know you are in there. Throw some supplies out and we will leave. Otherwise, things get ugly." The lanky guy began slamming his pipe against our metal gate. The loud clanging made our skin crawl, and it was already drawing more infected our way. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. We have to stop them. "That noise is going to bring a horde down on us," Dad whispered frantically. I took a deep breath. I slipped over to a second-floor window near the front gate. Keeping myself well hidden, I cracked the window open and yelled down, "Get lost, we do not have anything for you. Keep making noise and the monsters will tear you to pieces." The sudden voice startled them, but it confirmed we were inside. The scarred leader glared up at my window, finally decided to talk. "Huh, kid." Hand over the... He was cut off. The infected, drawn by the loud clanging, were already upon them. "Boss monsters!" The lanky guy shrieked. Cursing loudly, the leader spun around to face the threat. The 3 of them swung their weapons, barely taking down 2 infected as they retreated, but their eyes remained fixed on our house. They memorized our position. "I will remember this." "You are dead," the brute spat, before the 3 of them fled around the corner. I shut the window and slumped against the wall, but my heart felt heavier than ever. This was just the beginning. We were targeted. Even though those thugs had retreated, for now a dark shadow hung over us. They were like hounds catching the scent of blood. The next 2 days were thick with tension. We doubled our vigilance and tightened the watch schedule, ensuring 2 people kept guard at night. Dad rechecked every door and window, then scattered broken glass and hung empty tin cans along the walls as makeshift alarm systems. Sure enough, they returned on the 3rd afternoon. But this time they had brought reinforcements, 5 men in total. Instead of rushing our gate, they kept their distance, pointing and gesturing as they plotted their next move. "There are more of them now." Shen whimpered on the verge of tears. Mom held her close, pale, but trying to sound brave. "Do not worry, our gate is solid." But Dad, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "Just waiting for them to attack is way too passive." My heart squeezed and I looked at Dad. "You mean we should go on the offensive?" Dad's gaze swept over us, dead serious. "Like sneaking out tonight to find their camp and making some trouble to force them to back off?" "Absolutely not," Mom protested, her voice turning shrill. "It is way too dangerous out there with the monsters. Are you crazy, Lynn, risking your life over a few local thugs?" "I am not throwing my life away," Dad tried to explain. "It is just scouting. We cannot wait until they find a way to break the door down. That would be worse." "Still, no. What if something happens to you? How will Yue and Shen cope?" Mom was losing control. "We are staying inside and we are not going anywhere. They cannot get in." Shen grabbed Dad's arm, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please do not go. I am terrified." Watching them argue, a war raged in my mind. Dad's logic was solid. Staying passive was suicide, but Mom's fears were totally justified. The streets were crawling with danger, and Dad was not young anymore. What if Dad stopped yelling? I took a deep breath and cut them off. Dad is right. We cannot just sit here waiting to die. But Mom is right too. Heading out is too risky. They both stared at me. Can we try another approach? I pointed toward the perimeter wall. We can fortify the wall, make it look intimidating, or set up remote distractions to keep them away, or at least buy us some time. I paused, bringing up another worry. Plus, I bet they have backup. If things escalate, we are seriously outgunned. All we have are steel rods, wrenches, and a couple of kitchen knives. That is barely enough to fight off the infected, let alone an organized gang of survivors. Dad fell silent, knowing I was right. Mom calmed down slightly, though the terror never left her eyes. Finally, we reached a temporary compromise. No sneaking out for now. Instead, we would immediately reinforce the wall and build deterrents. We would also inventory anything that could be a weapon and start practicing. The family meeting ended in heavy silence. I knew this was just a temporary fix. If those thugs refused to back down, a clash was inevitable. Balancing family safety with going on the offensive was the toughest choice we faced. The peace from our compromise lasted exactly one day. At dawn, on the fourth morning, just as the sky turned gray, Dad and I on watch heard a strange noise. Not the growls of the infected, but metal scraping and hushed whispers. "They are here," Dad hissed, waking Mom and Shin. We quickly scrambled to our posts. Peering through the second-floor slit, my heart dropped. 6 of them, led by that same vulture-faced guy. They brought steel pipes, machetes, and even a small manual forklift from somewhere. They were planning to ram their way in. "Listen up inside," Vultureface shouted from behind the forklift, his voice menacing. "Last chance. Open up and hand over half your supplies and we leave. Otherwise, we break this door down." Mom and Shin turned pale with fear. Dad gripped his wrench until his knuckles turned white. Negotiation was off the table. Taking a deep breath, I cracked the window open and yelled, "In your dreams, ram it if you want. Let us see which is tougher, your forklift or our gate." Just a reminder, all this noise is going to bring the local monsters right to us. You asked for this. "Smash it, Vultureface," snarled, ordering his men forward. Bam! The heavy impact made the entire gate frame shudder. Fortunately, our reinforced metal door and heavy internal bolts held, but the booming noise was like a boulder thrown into still water. From down the road, the screeching of the infected echoed back. "Keep hitting it," Vultureface roared. "Dad, stick to the plan," I yelled downstairs. We had agreed that if they forced their way in, we had to fight back. Dad rushed to his station on the first floor right next to a small bowl-sized slot we had cut out. He grabbed our weapon, a modified pressure washer loaded with muddy water, chili powder, and dish soap. As the forklift rammed the gate a second time, Dad aimed through the slot at the driver and pulled the trigger. My eyes. What the hell is this? The burning, stinging liquid sprayed right into their faces, blinding their eyes and filling their noses. They shrieked in pain, instantly disabled. The forklift stopped. Just then, the first wave of infected drawn by the noise appeared at the corner, howling as they rushed us. "Boss, the monsters are coming, too many of them," a tall guy screamed. Vultureface panicked. Rubbing his burning eyes, he watched the approaching horde, realizing the raid had failed. "Damn it, you win this round. Move out." He glared at our house with pure venom, pulling his men back. They immediately clashed with the oncoming horde, fighting to escape. We watched tensely until they vanished, leaving a few dead monsters behind, along with the abandoned forklift. The threat was gone for now. We all collapsed in relief, our muscles turning to jelly. Shin sank to the floor, sobbing softly. Mom patted her back, her own hands shaking. We held them off. Dad's voice was exhausted but relieved. I nodded, looking at the mess outside. Honestly, I felt no joy. We only won this time using cheap tricks and home field advantage. We had enraged them, and their next attack would be much worse. They would come back better prepared. Plus, word would spread that we had valuable supplies. Our future was bound to be a nightmare. After driving off Vultureface's gang, we got a brief, tense breather. Straggling infected still drifted outside our wall, but no other survivors showed up. That abandoned forklift sat across the street like a silent warning. We did not dare relax. Dad worked on upgrading his chili water sprayer and reinforced the heavy braces behind the gate. Meanwhile, I started training Shin with whatever weapons we had, mostly poles and kitchen knives. We did not need to be heroes, just survive a close-quarters struggle and buy a second to react. Mom did her best to keep the household running, getting creative with canned goods. She even grew bean sprouts from our dry stash to add some color to our meals. Her quiet busyness soothed our frayed nerves, but just as we grew used to this high-alert lifestyle, an unexpected crisis struck from within. That afternoon, it was Shin's turn to inventory our food. She went down to the basement to count the last few crates. When she came up, she looked pale, complaining of dizziness and feeling stuffed up. We brushed it off as fatigue or poor basement ventilation, but by evening, she developed a low fever, her cheeks flushed with an unnatural heat. Curling up in bed, she whispered that she felt completely drained and sore all over. Is it a cold? Mom felt her forehead worried. She was terrified the other day and needs rest. We gave her cold meds and told her to rest. We all assumed it was just a chill, but the next morning her fever spiked even higher. What really made my heart stop was when she knocked over her water cup, spilling it all over her arm. When she pulled up her sleeve to dry it, we gasped in horror. Near her wrist was a thin, scabbed-over scratch. It was tiny, not a bite, but more like a scrape from something sharp. Shen, when did this happen? Mom's voice cracked with panic. Shen froze, staring at the mark as she tried to remember, her face turning paper white. I do not know, she whispered. Maybe when I was sorting the storeroom. I think a metal edge on a box scraped me. It did not hurt, so I ignored it. The storeroom was a dark, cluttered mess of junk and supplies. A tiny ignored scratch, plus a fever and fatigue. The realization struck like lightning. The most terrifying thought crept into our minds. Had Shen unknowingly touched something contaminated with the virus? Was she infected? In an instant, the air in the room turned to ice. Every single threat from outside suddenly felt trivial compared to this nightmare inside our own walls. Time seemed to freeze. Staring at the tiny scratch on her arm and her fever, we could not lie to ourselves anymore. This was no common cold. In this world, the tiniest scratch can mean a death sentence. Shen realized it too. Pure terror made her shake, tears rolling down silently. She pulled her hand back, hiding it behind her, as if she could hide the truth. No, it is just a cold, Mom rambled, hysterically, her face paler than Shen's. She reached out to hug her daughter, but froze paralyzed by a deeper terror. Her maternal instinct was fighting with her survival logic. Dad suddenly stood up, pacing the cramped room. His breathing was heavy, his eyes filled with absolute agony. He looked at Shen, then at Mom, and finally turned to me. Yeah? He rasped, his voice cracked and breaking. What should we do? I knew what he meant. According to the brutal rules of this world, suspected cases must be quarantined immediately. If things got worse, we would have to make the hardest choice to protect the rest of the family. But this was Shen. She was my sister. We need to quarantine her in the basement utility room, I heard myself say, my voice sounding chillingly cold. It has ventilation and the door is solid and we can slide food and water inside. The words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Shen stared at me in disbelief, utterly betrayed. Mom broke down completely. Xiaoyue, my sister, sobbed, destroying me inside. But I had to harden my heart. Shen, listen to me. This is just a precaution. We just need to watch you. Do it for yourself and for Mom and Dad. I practically screamed. Dad stared at the floor, then slowly nodded, agreeing to the only real choice we had. He stepped forward, forcing his voice to stay calm. Shen, listen to your brother. Go downstairs for a couple of days. I will make it comfortable. Mom kept crying, but she helped pack. Bedding and essentials. The moment I locked Shen inside that tiny first-floor closet, I felt like a ruthless executioner. Her muffled crying echoed through the door alongside Mom's comforting whispers. Outside, Dad and I stood in silent agony, despair heavy in the air. If she really, Dad choked, unable to finish. His eyes welled with tears, staring at that door. Horrific memories of my sister mutating in my arms in my past life flashed back, blurring with the present. No, I did not get a second chance at life just to lose her again. No ifs, I interrupted, a desperate fire in my eyes. Dad, watch Mom, protect our home. I am going out. He grabbed my arm. Where? To find medicine or anything that can save her. I stared at him. I remember a bio-research branch about 5 kilometers west. There might be leftover data or samples. I cannot just sit here and wait. Are you crazy? Outside, don't you know what it is like out there? You are risking death for a slim chance, Dad growled. Staying here is just waiting to die, I said, shaking off his hand. Dad, we lost her once already. I am not giving up now. On any hope, even if it is 1 in 10,000. I turned to pack, throwing on thick clothes, checking my weapons, and grabbing the last high-energy food. Wait for me, I said. Without looking back, I headed toward the basement's secret exit. That led to the outside world. Behind me, my parents screamed and my sister cried, but my steps did not falter. I knew it was risky, maybe suicide, but I could not watch her perish. This time I will hold on to hope myself, in my own hands. 13. Pushing open the hidden basement door, a chilling wind, smelling of rotten dust, hit my face, making me shiver. The sunlight was blinding. It had been a long time since I stood in such an open and dangerous place. I cast one last look at the closed door, imagining my parents' worried faces and my sister's pale look behind it. Inhaling deeply, I tightened my makeshift mask, gripped my steel pipe, and slipped into the shadows. Along the street, the outside world was far more ruined and lifeless than it looked from our window. Abandoned cars blocked the roads and shattered glass lay everywhere. Faint, distant growls echoed, a constant reminder that danger was all around. My goal was the Bioresearch Institute, 5 kilometers west. During my past life escape, I had seen its logo from afar. They supposedly did virus-related research there. It was the only place left with any clues. I did not dare walk on main roads. I stuck to alleys, bushes, and empty shops to detour forward. Every step was agonizingly cautious, my ears straining for any tiny sound. A few times I almost ran headfirst into wandering infected. Their movements were stiff, but their senses were sharp. Pressing against the wall, I held my breath as they shuffled past just inches away. The smell of decay was suffocating, my heart pounding wildly. About halfway there, crossing an intersection, I froze and ducked behind an abandoned bus. Right across the street were 2 members of Vulture Face's gang cursing as they looted a ruined convenience store. What a small, cruel world. Talk about bad luck. My heart tightened. I could not let them spot me. Holding my breath, I used the cars for cover, backing away slowly to take a longer detour. As I neared the institute, the surroundings grew increasingly desolate. Yet the signs of destruction were still horrifying. Finally, that familiar white building came into view. A corner of its wall had collapsed, most windows were shattered, and several dusty cars sat outside. One had even crashed straight into the entrance. Chaos had clearly erupted here. After watching for a long time to ensure no movement, I climbed over the collapsed wall, stepped on shattered glass, and slipped inside the dim lobby. It was dark. Overturned desks and scattered documents lay everywhere. Dried blackened blood splatters stained the walls. The air smelled of chemicals and mold, making my heart sink. Could I really find anything useful in this mess? But thinking of Shenxing, I gritted my teeth and searched floor by floor. Most rooms were ransacked with equipment stolen or smashed. I focused on areas likely to hold paper files or sample cold storage rooms. Just as I pushed open an archive room door, disaster struck. From the shadows, a mutated researcher in a white lab coat lunged at me. He was faster than the infected outside, caught me off guard, and knocked me back. My steel pipe flying out of my hand. His blood-smeared face and gaping jaw were inches away, his putrid breath suffocating me. 14. The mutated researcher had terrifying strength, his rotting fingers digging deep into my shoulders, sinking into my flesh. Foul saliva dripped onto my mask as his jaws snapped toward my neck. Pure survival instinct took over. Summoning every ounce of strength, I slammed my knee hard into his gut. He let out a muffled growl and his grip loosened slightly. In that split second, I jammed one hand against his chin while my other hand searched the floor frantically. I felt it, my steel pipe. I shoved it horizontally right into his snapping jaws. A sickening crunch of bone echoed. He thrashed wildly, but the pipe wedged in his jaws kept him from biting. Seizing the moment, I flipped him over, pinned him, and yanked my backup weapon from my belt, a heavy wrench. I slammed it onto his head. Once, twice, 3 times until he stopped moving. I collapsed beside him, gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat and filth, my arms shaking violently from the sheer exertion of the struggle. The fight had drained almost all my energy, reminding me once again of the terrifying reality of death. Resting for just a few minutes, I struggled up, grabbed my pipe, and scanned the trashed archive room. Documents were scattered everywhere. But in the corner, a heavy metal filing cabinet lay tipped over its door, bent open, revealing several loose folders. Holding on to a shred of hope, I knelt down to search. Most were useless reports and inventory lists. Just as I was about to give up, a folder labeled Special Sample Inhibitor caught my eye. My heart pounded. I opened it carefully to find paper reports and complex data charts inside. I scanned them quickly. Though filled with technical jargon, I grasped the key details. This inhibitor was not a cure, but an experimental prototype that could drastically delay virus replication and symptom onset in the early stages. The report concluded that a few finished samples might be stored in a specific cryogenic cabinet in the adjacent sample room. Though a long shot, it was real hope. I rushed next door to the freezing storage room. The refrigeration units had stopped working due to the power outage. Following the file's directions, I found the special S7 cryogenic cabinet. The door was shut, but a tiny green indicator light was faintly glowing. It had backup power. I tried to open the door with trembling hands, but it required a keycard. What now? I looked around, my eyes landing on the dead researcher. Swallowing my disgust, I searched his lab coat pockets and found an ID card. Armed with the card, I rushed back, took a deep breath, and swiped it. With a soft beep, the green light flashed and the lock clicked open. I pulled the door open as cold air rushed out, revealing neatly arranged rows of finger-sized glass ampules filled with pale blue liquid. The label read, Virus Inhibitor EXP Lot S7. I counted 12 in total. Carefully, I packed these 12 precious inhibitors and the file into the bottom of my pack. My hands shook with excitement. This would buy Shenxing precious time. Not daring to linger, I retraced my steps, slipping outside. Breathing the fresh air made me feel alive again. The return trip was just as dangerous, but with hope in my heart, my steps felt lighter. Hang on, Shenxing. I am coming home. 15. The road back felt longer than before. The inhibitors in my pack felt incredibly heavy, both a beacon of hope and a massive responsibility. I pushed forward on sheer willpower, dodging infected and detouring around danger. Exhausted, I finally saw our familiar reinforced house appear. Slipping around to the back, I found the hidden basement entrance and tapped out our secret knock. The door opened quickly. It was Dad, looking anxious and exhausted. Seeing me safe, he visibly relaxed, though the worry in his eyes did not fade. Are you okay? He whispered. I slipped inside and locked the door. I am fine. I found it. I did not waste time immediately asking, how is Shenxing? His face fell. Her fever has not broke. She is delirious, babbling nonsense, and the scar on her arm looks darker. My heart clenched. I ran straight to the first-floor storage room where Mom stood with swollen red eyes. Seeing me, she looked like she had found a lifeline. Xiao Yue, you are back. Shenxing Shi, Mom, do not worry. I found medicine. I interrupted, carefully pulling the pale blue inhibitor and the file from my pack. That can delay the virus. Let us give it to her quick. Hurriedly following the simplified instructions, we used a sterile syringe to inject Shenxing. Throughout the process, she only groaned deliriously without waking up. Next came the agonizing wait. The three of us stood outside the storage room in total silence every second, dragging like an eternity. I kept replaying the warnings results vary, and mild discomfort may occur. And it is not a cure. About an hour later, Mom's tearful gasp echoed from inside. It is going down. Her fever is breaking, Dad, and I rushed to the peephole. Her breathing seemed steadier, and the sweat on her forehead was clearing. Mom felt her skin. The fever was indeed dropping. Another half hour passed, and Shenxing slowly woke up. She was weak, but her eyes were clear. Mom, I am thirsty, she whispered. I quickly handed the water cup inside. His fever finally broke, and he regained consciousness. The inhibitor was working. A huge weight was lifted from our chests. We knew this only delayed things rather than curing the virus, but at least we bought precious time. Shenxing did not have to face the worst right away, keeping our family whole for now. I carried him upstairs to his bedroom so he could rest comfortably. Seeing him curled up asleep next to Mom, I felt a deep, exhausted fatigue, yet my heart was filled with warmth. I had actually brought hope back. Chapter 16. Shenxing's fever broke and he woke up. Though weak and needing quiet rest, this was the best possible outcome. The heavy gloom in our home lifted and even the air seemed to lighten up. Under Mom's care, Shenxing finally smiled again. Dad looked relieved, but a shadow of deep thought lingered in his eyes. He stood by the window, studying the inhibitor report I brought back. Putting the papers down, he called out, Xiao Yue. He looked grave as he addressed me. This report says the inhibitor only buys time. It is not a cure. I nodded, my heart heavy. I know, Dad. But at least we have a window now. The paper says, depending on the person it could delay it by a few weeks to several months. Dad repeated those words, staring out at the desolate streets. Simply stalling is not enough. We must find a real cure, or start planning for a much longer survival. His warning was a wake-up call. Yes, we could not rely on the inhibitor forever. The immediate crisis had passed, but survival was still a daily fight. Outside, threats remained, and our supplies would eventually run dry. Dad, I said, are you saying we need to find a way to be self-sufficient? Dad pointed to the company data attached to the report. This mentions that the virus seems sensitive to certain plant extracts. It is far from a cure, but it is a start. We should use our yard to grow things. Not just food, but maybe medicinal plants. Medicinal plants. Even if we only use them to sanitize or prevent infection, it is worth a shot. His idea sparked a fire in me. He was right. We had only focused on hoarding, never on producing. If we could build a miniature ecosystem here, ecological cycle, even on a tiny scale, it would massively boost our long-term survival. We also need water, Dad continued. Our rainwater collection and filtration must be upgraded. If possible, we should dig a well. and we need backup power beside the solar panels. The solar panels need maintenance, and we must find alternative generators. The two of us talked late into the night, our ideas expanding. Before, we were just playing defense. Now we were actually planning to build, figuring out how to establish real roots in this broken world and truly survive. As Shenshin slowly recovered, he overheard us and chimed in softly. "Hey, brother, I can help track the plants and organize our notes." Seeing my family come together, united by a spark of hope, gave me incredible strength. This crisis had brought despair, but it also forced us onto a new path. We were no longer just miserable survivors scraping by in the dirt. We were going to build a new life upon these ashes. Chapter 17. We got straight to work. Dad was a man of action. He immediately drew up plans to transform our yard. We cleared out a cluttered corner, gathering every container we could find. Broken storage bins and even heavy plastic bags were filled with our small stockpile of planting soil and dirt, and the soil from our yard, creating a few tiny test plots. Mom took charge of sorting the seeds. Along with our stored vegetables, we salvaged dry beans and sprouted potatoes. Once Shenshin felt a bit stronger, he sat on a small stool to help separate the seeds, carefully logging the planting dates and varieties in his notebook. I handled security and resources, reinforcing our defenses to keep Vulture Face and his gang from returning while trying to build a filtration system based on Dad's sketches. We improved our rainwater filtration using sand charcoal and clean cloth to make simple filters. We connected several large barrels to store as much clean water as possible. The busy days flew by. We worked hard by day and gathered at night under solar lights to study that inhibitor report discussing which plants might offer antibacterial or therapeutic benefits for Shenshin. We planned what to search for on our next supply run. When the first tiny green sprouts finally broke through the soil in our yard, the joy brought us more joy than finding a whole crate of canned food. Those sprouts were not just future meals, they were symbols of pure life and hope. Yet danger never stays away for long. One afternoon, while checking the alarm systems along our perimeter fence, I caught a faint, persistent rumble of an engine in the distance. It did not sound like a standard car. It was more like motorcycles or a generator. The noise came from the east, faint but unmistakable. I immediately went on high alert and signaled my family to stay silent. We hid on the second floor, watching carefully. The roaring engine noise lasted for 10 minutes before fading away. We did not see any vehicles near our house, but it was enough to shatter our fragile peace. Other survivors are out there and they have vehicles. Dad said, his face grim. This meant they could cover vast distances, bringing far greater resources and threats. The quiet safety we had enjoyed in this neighborhood was about to be shattered. Would Vulture Face and his men hear the noise too? Would they team up with this new group or get wiped out by them? The unknown always brings the worst dangers. Just as our yard began to sprout life, a storm was brewing outside. We had to grow stronger and stay hidden to protect our hard-won peace in this chaotic world. Chapter 18. That engine noise was like a stone thrown into a quiet pond, shattering the fragile sanctuary we had worked so hard to maintain. For the next 2 days, we remained on high alert, extending our shifts on guard duty. Sure enough, on the third morning, new guests arrived. It was not the Vulture Face gang, but a convoy of 3 heavily modified off-road SUVs and motorcycles. They did not approach our house instead, driving slowly down the main street. The passengers held weapons, scanning the buildings on both sides. They looked far more disciplined and better equipped than Vulture Face's gang, and their trucks were loaded with supplies. "It is another group of survivors," Dad whispered, his brow furrowed in worry. "They look like they are scouting or searching for something." We held our breath, watching the convoy roll past our front gate. Fortunately, they did not seem to notice us. They showed no interest in our heavily fortified, dead, silent house and quickly vanished around the corner. We let out our breath, but our hearts sank. "It is good they passed us by," I whispered, "but it means we are no longer alone here." It is not just us and Vulture Face anymore. Things are about to get complicated. Mom looked toward our tiny sprouting garden with deep anxiety. Will they come and steal our food? Not yet, I reasoned. They have vehicles and are looking for bigger targets. With vehicles, they can scavenge much further away. Our house does not look like a jackpot to them, but the future is uncertain. More importantly, this convoy confirms there is a much larger, highly organized group operating nearby with massive resources. This group has mobility and firepower we simply cannot match, and we have no idea if they are friendly. That afternoon, I risked climbing onto the roof. Using my makeshift spyglass to scan the distance, I saw the convoy pull over. They stopped near an abandoned factory on the edge of town, which looked like their new makeshift base. Black smoke was drifting from the chimney. They were moving in. I brought the news back with mixed feelings. A powerful neighbor was now nearby. On one hand, making contact could bring us vital information supplies or even medical clues about the virus. They are clearly well equipped. But on the other hand, in this lawless wasteland, a powerful group of strangers usually spells disaster. Nobody knows what their rules are or how they treat a small family like ours. We marked the factory on our map as a high-threat zone. Surviving now meant watching out for the infected random raiders and this massive new neighbor. In this hostile world, our little fortress suddenly felt incredibly small, yet it only hardened our resolve to survive on our own terms. Chapter 19. The new faction at the abandoned factory hung over us like a dark, looming cloud. They occasionally sent out scouting vehicles, but thankfully kept their distance from our immediate area. This gave us a brief reprieve, though we still lived in constant fear. As for Vulture Face and his men, they had not returned since we beat them. We did not know if they fled were watching us from the shadows or got swallowed up by the factory faction. This silence was terrifying. On the bright side, Chen stabilized thanks to the inhibitor, though he remained weaker than usual. But he was able to help with light household chores and care for our little garden. Those tiny green sprouts became our ultimate mental escape. That night, under the dim glow of the solar light, we held an urgent family meeting. Everyone knows where we stand, I began. There are at least 2 rival factions out there. We are safe for now, but we are like a tiny sailboat caught in a massive storm. We cannot take a direct hit. Dad nodded in agreement. If we ration our food, we have about 6 months, but we cannot just live off our stockpile forever. And we only have 11 vials of inhibitor left. Dad glanced at Shen. He did not say it aloud, but we knew time was running out. Do we have to leave? Mom asked, terrified. It is suicide out there. Leaving this fortified home we worked so hard to build was a terrifying thought. Outside was a hellscape of infected and hostile factions. Moving now was a death sentence. I shook my head, rejecting the idea. This is our home. We have invested everything here, and we know this area best. That is our edge. Shen spoke up softly. What if we try to make contact with the factory group? Maybe they are not bad people. Maybe they have more resources or a way to cure me. Shen's idea of seeking help from the outside was highly tempting, but also incredibly dangerous. Too risky, Dad said, shaking his head. We do not know nothing about them. If they are more ruthless than Vulture Face, we would be walking straight into a trap. I thought it over and offered a compromise. We cannot approach them, but we can observe them passively to learn their patterns. We can monitor their routines, see what supplies they target, and find out how they treat other survivors. Meanwhile, we must speed up our own preparations. I pointed out the window. Our garden must expand, and our water filtration needs to be flawless. Dad, didn't you say we should try setting up some basic traps and early warnings further out? I think we should start now. We need to push our safe zone, or at least our warning perimeter, just a bit further. Most importantly, looking at my family, I know we need a backup plan. If this place becomes unlivable, we must have a relatively safe escape route and a general destination. It is a heavy decision, but absolutely necessary. We can't put all our hopes on this fortress staying impenetrable forever. Everyone agreed and our focus sharpened. While holding down the fort, we would keep watch, speed up our self-sufficiency, and quietly map out a backup plan to survive. Our survival game entered a more complex patient phase. 20. Once the new strategy was locked in, we moved fast. Dad and I started setting up simple but effective warning traps. We ran ultra-fine fishing line across key spots rigged to ropes of empty cans and slipped metal sheets under loose rubble to clatter when stepped on. They're primitive, but they'll buy us precious early warning time. Meanwhile, Mom and Shenxing expanded our microfarm, gathering every container they could find and turning old cabinets into planter boxes. Along with vegetables, we planted mint and chamomile for their soothing properties inspired by the lab reports. The days blurred by in a mix of hard work and high alert. Soon we noticed something about the factory faction. They kept to strict patrol routes and rarely entered our residential zone, staying mostly around the downtown strip and the plant itself. That gave us some breathing room. Then on a deceptively quiet afternoon, everything changed. I was up on the roof doing a routine sweep when I heard a faint, crackling static. At first I thought my ears were ringing, but the rhythm was too steady. Holding my breath, I listened closer and traced it to the backpack I brought from the lab. Inside, next to the inhibitors and reports, were a few gadgets I'd grabbed from the empty offices just in case. I scrambled down the roof and tore into the bag. The noise was coming from a palm-sized black device with a tiny screen and antenna. I recognized it as a portable multi-band radio transceiver. I'd kept it on a whim, never dreaming it would still have juice, let alone catch a signal. I switched it on slowly, turned the knob, and the static began to clear, giving way to a muffled human voice. Any survivors out there, please respond. This is Dawn Camp offering shelter to the north. Repeat. The connection was terrible, fading through thick static, and it quickly died. I kept tweaking the dial, but got nothing but dead air. But those words, Dawn Camp shelter in the north, hit me like lightning. Besides us, the Vulture Gang, and the Factory faction, there was actually a survivor group out there willing to take people in, and they were somewhere up north. I broke the news to my family immediately. Everyone was ecstatic, especially Shenxing, whose eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. Bro, can we go north? Maybe they have doctors who can actually cure me. He grabbed my arm, his voice trembling with hope. Dad was more cautious. Don't get ahead of yourself. The signal was incredibly weak. We don't have a location, and we don't even know if it's real. What if it's a trap? Mom agreed. How would we even travel that far? It is too dangerous. I knew they were right. It was a shot in the dark, completely unverified, but it still gave us a massive shot of adrenaline and a potential new direction. We decided to prioritize monitoring the radio, hoping to pick up clearer details. Heading north to search for Dawn Camp was now a major factor we had to weigh when mapping out our escape routes. Our horizon of hope felt a little wider. 21. The broadcast about Dawn Camp was a seed quietly taking root in our minds. For several nights straight, we huddled around the radio trying to catch that weak signal, slowly piecing together fragments of information. The camp was in a mountain range dozens of kilometers north, boasting basic order medical facilities and active crops. It sounded like paradise, but the journey was incredibly risky. Dozens of kilometers of wasteland. Traveling with Shenxing, who needed regular inhibitor shots, meant crossing unknown zones filled with infected and hostile survivors. It was a massive gamble. Meanwhile, our fortress life went on, and the crops in the garden flourished. The mint and chamomile sprouted green shoots, and while they weren't ready for medicine, just seeing them brought us peace. Dad's early warning line also paid off once, alerting us in time to slip past a wandering pack of infected. The Factory faction kept their distance, leaving us in peace. It felt like we were finally finding our footing. That evening, we sat together to face our ultimate choice. Do we risk going north to find a camp that might just be a mirage, or do we stay and defend our increasingly secure home? I want to go, Shenxing spoke up. First, his voice quiet but steady. I know the road is dangerous, but I can't survive on inhibitors forever and drag everyone down. I want to get cured. And I want to see if there is actually a place like Dawn Camp where people can live together in peace. Mom squeezed Shenxing's hand, her eyes rimmed with red, but she didn't disagree. She looked at Dad and me. Dad remained silent for a long time before speaking. We built this place from scratch. It is our blood and sweat, and the outside world is too unpredictable. He paused, then sighed. But for Shenxing and for a real future, it is worth the gamble. I can convert this house into a hidden supply cache, giving us a fallback route if things go wrong. Finally, all eyes turned to me. Memories of my family's horrific deaths in my past life flashed against the backdrop of our hard-fought survival in this one. I realized then that clinging to a specific spot didn't matter. What mattered was keeping us together, moving toward hope. We aren't going to Dawn Camp, I said. Shenxing's face fell, but I quickly added, but we are heading north. They stared at me in confusion. We won't pin all our hopes on a distant promise. We'll head north, moving step by step, scouting for a better long-term spot, while searching for concrete news about Dawn. Just as Dad said, we keep this house as a backup base. We'll take essential supplies and inhibitors, travel light, and play it safe. If we can't find anything better, or if Dawn Camp turns out to be a bust, we can always retreat here or find another path. This plan was practical, flexible. It respected the dangers ahead without losing hope, and it valued our safe haven without letting it become our cage. My family waited over and agreed. The next few days were a blur of intense preparation. We sorted our gear, mapped a route north, sealed and disguised our main entryways, and stocked the inside with vital supplies and a detailed guide. If another survivor stumbled across it, it might just give them a fighting chance to survive. A month later, on a misty morning, we slung on our packs and took one last look at the home we had poured our souls into. The garden vegetables looked remarkably crisp in the morning dew. I pushed open the massive front door we had reinforced so many times, breathed in the crisp, cool air, and whispered, "Let's go." Together, our family of four stepped out under the dawn, starting our unknown journey north. Behind us was the fortress that kept us safe, Ahead was a foggy, uncertain future that still carried a glimmer of hope. We were no longer just desperate scavengers. We were a family travelers bound for a new home. The story goes on.